the topic of this talk is supposed to be about systems, sort of a system science approach in informatics. Okay, so I'm trying to use this tablet with a pen right now so that I can draw some pictures better than I did last time when I gave a talk on Friday. So we'll see how it works. But here's essentially one model that I've worked on that kind of gets the point across. Suppose I have let's see, I gotta get my drawing thing going here. I have a block of these are, let's say, documents of one sort. We'll call those documents. And then I've got a person over here who is very interested in being able to represent the content of this repository of documents by using some kind of controlled, standardized terminology. So we have here, let's just call it a standardized terminology, and you know, it's got basically noun phrases, and it's maybe got relations in it, typical kind of thing. It's got hierarchical relations of a superclass and subclass, and it's got maybe partitive relationships, or maybe it's a meronymical vocabulary or ontology that it's based on. So, like, you know, the stomach is part of the body, or maybe it has, let's assume it has synonymy kinds of relations. So it's not quite an acyclic graph, because you could have cycles based on sameness of meaning of expressions. And I'm holding aside right now whether we're talking about concepts or the expressions of those concepts. Just, I mean, that's an important distinction, but I'm not going to deal with it right now for this example. But so then the question is, how, you know, is this a good terminology to represent the content, the conceptual or informational content of this set of documents? Well, it may or it may not be. There's probably a number of these candidate terminologies that might do the trick. Let's say 1, 2, 3 here. And so what this person needs to do is figure out whether one or another of these does the better job. Does it represent the, let's say, conceptual content that's important with respect to this individual's purposes of this set of documents? So, and that could vary. If this is a consumer, a layperson, it may be a very different picture than if it's a professional radiologist or a mechanical engineer or a nurse or whatever. I mean, there could be quite different points of view taken here. And the old example of the what's it called? The old example of a book that's about, you have a book, and the book talks about elephants and prehistoric elephant fossils and in Kenya. And then the question is, well, what are your purposes? How do you represent this thing? What are the most important aspects? Depending upon what your point of view is, you might emphasize Kenya, you might emphasize fossils, you might emphasize elephants. So that's sort of the idea. And so it's there are different ways to set this up, but the point is this person needs to make a decision about which of these terminologies represents, with respect to his purposes or her purposes, this set of documents in the best way. And to keep it simple, we'll say the best way is captures most of the, or as much as possible of the conceptual content. What conceptual content? Again, that it's important to represent. That probably depends on this person's purposes, just like the example of the elephants, fossils, in Kenya. Okay, so that's nice. Now let's go to a new page. Go to a blank page here. And the point of this is that this is a system. You can look at this as a kind of a choice system right there. I seem to have lost some of my stuff, but anyway, it's a choice system, if you like, or a system in informatics that we could represent. And in fact, we can evaluate terminologies with respect to some archetypical set of content with respect to the relative coverage that the terminologies provide for that set of documents. However, my guess is, well, this is convenient. My guess is that, in fact, or my claim is that's a reasonable approximation for some uses, but it doesn't really get the reality of the situation, probably, in that we probably have, I think I have to draw, let's see. In fact, we probably have multiple individuals, or instead, if you don't like individuals, say scientific organizations or scientific labs or something. I'm just drawing them as stickmen for simplicity. And each of these separate individuals, or actors, if you like, have a set of documents. And each of these individuals is hoping to choose from among the candidate terminologies as to which of the candidate terminologies will, in fact, provide the best coverage according, again, to their particular purposes. That's sort of a pragmatic aspect that comes into this, of these documents. And these are different documents. I better make that clear. Different sets of documents. Okay, so just to give it some meat on this could be a veterinarian, a practicing veterinarian. This could be a public health researcher, and this could be a family practitioner. And each of them may have some set of papers, all right? And the papers, scientific papers, could be, or case studies, if you like, could overlap in some cases, but they can be discrete. So that's important to keep in mind. I mean, presumably what the veterinarian needs to read about is not going to be exactly the same as what the family practitioner needs to keep up on. But they could overlap, and they could overlap, for example, with Zika, and likewise with the public health practitioner. Well, anyway, so let's suppose, just to keep things simple, that the universe of controlled terminologies that are available to these decision makers here, these choosers, are standard terminologies 1, 2, and 3. So now, if all you think at this point is that these guys operate completely independently, then we're simply back to we're back to this situation. We're just considering a single individual. On the other hand, if you think that there might be some relationship or I don't know, purpose or of activity, or somehow this is the key, that this person's decision making, say this person's decision making, the family practitioner, will have an effect on the effects of this person's decision making. So it's not like what this person changes how this person chooses in any direct sense, but that the results of the choices this person makes can change the sort of the practical outcomes of the choices this person makes. Now, so what's important here? If we make that kind of assumption, then we can't just reduce this more complicated system here, I'll call it System 2, we can't just reduce that to what I'll call this System 1. We can't, in effect, reduce it to 3 System 1s. We can't reduce that in that way. And the reason why is because of that interconnectedness of the effects of their choosing. So now let's build into something that doesn't sound so abstract. And so let's suppose that in this larger society depicted here of information producers and users, it is there's a set of values characterizing this community such that it is highly valued that information be shared between researchers, practitioners, scientific centers, whatever it is you want to talk about. If that need to share the information's important, then we're again in a situation where this more complicated situation is not simply in some way reducible to 3 instances of this. That's my claim anyway. So what does that mean? What am I trying to get at here? Well, what I'm trying to get at is well, I need one more piece of this before I can make it convincing. The fact is, we've been talking about using these terminologies to represent the content of these documents. Every time I do that, I start getting messed up a little bit. I'm not sure. I'm going to try that again. Let's see if I put and then maybe this will work. Yeah, okay, that's better. So here's the thing, and this is, hold everything that I just went through in your head. So now there's another issue. Let me draw a book. here, I'm going to try to draw a book. Okay, so this is my drawing of a book. Okay? It's not going to win any awards, but that's it. Now, we have a person over here. Let's call this person a librarian. Now, the fact is that when we work with sort of when we work with repositories of information objects like books, it could be computer programs, it could be musical recordings, who knows what, toys, children's toys for a children's museum or library or whatever. Anyway, the thing, I'm going to start to sound a little philosophical here, but the thing itself is not what we usually work with when we're attempting to retrieve information, at least in the sense of finding out what's available and then asking for it. We don't get the thing itself. What we get is what we'll call a surrogate representation. That stands between us and the actual information object that we're interested in. And this is the surrogate representation of that object. And so what we typically work with, as I said, is the surrogate representation. So to take some of the, obtuseness out of the language, this is a library catalog record. So when I search my local hometown library, whether it's a really old one, so they still have an actual physical card catalog, or they're more up to date and I have a card catalog that's online. What I'm searching through and what I'm getting access to immediately are the surrogate representations of the information objects that are actually in the collection. And it's kind of like the old philosophers, we had the five senses, right? And with our five senses, we got some kind of sensational representation of the thing in itself, and the question, is, is what we get and construct with our five senses, how close is that to whatever this is? What can we know about this based on those five senses? And that, it's easy to come up with examples where there does seem to be a difference here because dogs don't see the same way we do, for example. Different animals perceive the world differently, and so their representation of the thing, just physiologically, and probably to some extent at a more intellectual semantic level in their brains, the thing, whatever it is represented differently. So is that the kind, that's kind of, this is kind of similar to that, but it doesn't have all the problems this does, I guess. But the fact is, we do work to surrogate representations. Now, a further question to ask, which I'm not going to ask today, but, it really is sort of, you have the world out here, and I'm really going to try and draw the world. Well, wait a minute. Let me back that up. So we have the world out here, and that's my rendition of the world. And so, if you like, this is the world of the information objects that we deal with, and by and large, what we run into, what we encounter, in most of our work, I claim, as informaticians and as consumers of information, are representations of there are surrogate representations of the real world of information. And that's fine. I mean, that indirection works really well, particularly since it's, we said earlier, with that elephant fossil Kenya book, you can take multiple perspectives on this and so come up with completely different surrogate representations depending upon the attitude you want to take towards the intention that you have towards the actual information. So, okay, so having said all that, now we go back to this, and what these guys are trying to do then, the family doc, the public health researcher, the veterinarian, they're attempting to represent their documents with these terminologies. That is to say, they're building surrogate representations. Whoa, that's not what I wanted. They're building surrogate representations of their documents using these terminologies. And so they're capturing the concepts that they find appropriate. Where do the concepts come from? Well, you know, if I'm back to the book on prehistoric elephant fossils in Kenya, what I want is to, if I'm the Kenyan embassy, maybe what I really want to emphasize is the fact that it's a book about Kenya. If I'm a paleontologist or if I'm somebody, archaeologist or something, maybe I'm interested in the fact that it's fossils, right? Maybe if I'm interested in elephants, if I'm an elephant specialist, maybe I'm interested in the fact that it's elephants, and secondarily that it's Kenya. So what? Well, if I've explained this correctly, then what you might begin to guess is that, well, forget about this. We just need to work with these surrogate representations that are based on these terminologies that we choose. And however this person decides what terminology to use to construct that surrogate representation of their documents, they'll do that. And likewise for this person, they'll do that. And likewise for this person, they'll do that. But then when they want to share information, what is shared directly are not the information objects themselves, but the surrogate representations. Based on the surrogate representations, we have sharing of the information objects. But it's indirectly through the sharing and linking between the sets of surrogate representations. That makes them very important in this whole project. And remember what I said before is where we have in this society, in this community, we have a strong value for representing, for sharing information, where we're just scientists who are not trying to compete with each other for that Nobel Prize. What we really want to do is just further the good of humanity and share information across all of our study centers, and we're not competing for grants and all kinds of stuff. So presumably this is a fairly unrealistic situation, but it's a very open society, and we're sharing this information. The question is, how do we represent this whole thing? Since sharing and mapping and sharing is done by going between the surrogate representations, which are based on these standardized terminology, the only way this person is going to be able to link his information or her information to this person's information via the surrogate representations is going to be through vocabulary maps. I'm going to have to map between the vocabularies. All right, so no mapping between vocabularies is perfect. There's going to be some degree of loss of content. They're not going to, if they were exactly the same representational power with respect to a set of documents, so that the, exactly equivalent in content or representational power, surrogate representations could be constructed, then there'd be no difference between the terminologies. But presumably, since we have different document sets, and we have different pragmatic interests involved as to what's important to represent, we really are gonna have to worry about the different terminologies showing up, or possibly, and we can only link or share our surrogate representations in a way that is based on some kind of mapping between the terminologies. So then the question comes down to this one. And I'm going to go to a new page. Here's the question for you. Just get this. Okay, here's the question. Let me go back to this. So we got this guy, and we've got this guy, and this guy, and there are different document sets. And so the question is homogeneity is that the best choice? That is, should they all choose the same terminology? Or is heterogeneity a better choice? Now, it's sort of an apocryphal. You'll find it's not like a stated theorem or anything, but you'll find the suggestion quite often that well, it would be better if we maybe talking about in healthcare organizations or across healthcare organizations, maybe it would be better if everybody used the same terminology or vocabulary or coding system, but there are practical problems to do that, so we're going to have to assume that there's heterogeneity. As though heterogeneity, the justification for it, it's just the fact that things are uncontrolled, and it's going to, there's going to be, if you like, a certain fall into entropy, increase in entropy, whenever in vocabulary, that things are going to fall into the disorder of heterogeneity. All right, so I am going to tell you that I never believed that, and I deliberately set out to show that point of view was was one of those received opinions that seems obvious but is in fact false. And the way I did it was, I was worried about this as an overall system of decision makers. Back to wherever we were before. Let's see. Yeah, this overall set, not reducible to a single system because of the interconnectivity and interrelatedness of the effects of decisions. And that's really what I'm suggesting as the situation here, if I can ever find it. Yeah, here, that the situation is such that, in fact, it can turn out that the best results, remember, we're trying to share information in addition to getting the best use out of our own information, each of these guys. And it turns out under those circumstances that heterogeneity can be shown, under some conditions, to be the more rational outcome across this whole system. And you wouldn't, that's well, and maybe it's surprising, maybe it's not, but it's not just a matter of practicality. It comes down to being able to where you have to deal with two different things, which is one, maximize the representation of content, of your own content, each of these individuals' content. That's one. And then two, maximizing information sharing. And especially with the latter one, you might think, well, yeah, if we're going to maximize information sharing, then we want homogeneity. But you got to consider both of these. And in that, it turns out you can describe cases in which heterogeneity across the whole system is the rational or the preferred outcome. I suppose there are a lot of different ways to do this. I did it, the way I've done it is by using, by using Nash equilibriums. I have a very patient friend who's actually an authority in decision and game theory at Missouri, and has worked with me off and on over the years on this stuff. But basically, don't make too much out of the phrase, but it's non-cooperative game theory, and Nash equilibrium is the point at which no actor can improve his situation unless somebody else changes their position, and roughly. And so that's how we get to somewhere like this. From this situation, we want each of these to, the Nash equilibrium is going to be at the point at which they can best represent their information and maximize sharing, and they get the most benefit from their choice, and they can't improve it unless somebody else changes their choice. And there can be multiple Nash equilibrium in a situation, but the little case I worked through, just there was one. But it's interesting, I think, that in its own right, that whole thing about the terminology. But my main point today is to introduce, if I can find what I'm looking for, is to introduce the idea that this, you've got to look at things at a systems level where there's interconnectedness, or at least where what happens, where the outcome in one case can affect the outcome in another case, not the decision making per se, but since this person and this person may not know the other exists, and they may have no communication between them, but the practical effects of the decision making in this case may affect the decision making in this case, or may affect not the decision making but the outcomes of the decision making, and that you cannot reduce this to merely 3 individual isolated cases of our original choice situation, where an individual was choosing among 3 vocabularies to represent their result. So anyway, so that's a kind of messy but worked out example. I mean, I've got a much more formal treatment of that particular case if you're interested in that. But now I just want to talk about the same thing from a different point of view, which is decision making. Well, think of it in terms of clinical decision making. Usually, I think, and I may be talking through my hat here, but my impression is that when clinical decision support systems are discussed and evaluated, they may be evaluated on multiple individual decision makers, right? And in many patient cases or whatever. But the paradigm case is you have a clinician making decisions with respect to a patient, or maybe a population of patients or something of that sort. Well, what I'm suggesting is that what I want to suggest and work out in more detail, but I'm just going to suggest it today, is that the decision making, you can't, just as you can't in this vocabulary case, reduce everything to an individual making decisions in isolation. In fact, there are multiple clinicians. There's a larger system in which the decision making of an individual clinician can, in fact, have an effect on the practical outcomes of the decisions made by other decision makers. And it's not a matter of those 2 clinician decision makers ever knowing anything about the other, or even if they do, they can't exchange information perhaps because of HIPAA guidelines or who knows what might keep them from talking to each other, exchanging information. So it's not as though clinicians A's decision changes the decision of clinician B, but it may change the effect, the practical effect of clinician B's decision. So I'm just going to describe briefly my own case. I had at one time, not now, but at one time I had 3 active clinical decision makers trying to, push me along and keep me going. I had a family practitioner. Well, he wasn't a family practitioner, but my primary care doc, he's an internist. So I had that person. I had a psychologist and I had a physical therapist. Now, each of these individuals were operating in their own sphere, and they didn't communicate with each other, and or they normally couldn't. In fact, two of them did work for the same corporate entity, but the other one was completely separate. And so there's some, you know, I'll make it really, really simple. The PT person is telling me, for example, that I need to worry. I shouldn't walk too far, right? Because say I've got something wrong with I had some kind of strain or something in my leg, so I was supposed to restrict walking. The psychologist knows nothing about that and is telling me, you could probably lift your spirits and not be depressed if you got out and you walked your dog after work. That physical activity would be good. This is a minor sort of case, but the decisions, at least potentially, are somewhat in conflict, some minor way in conflict. I can't walk my dog very far if it's going to make my condition worse, according to the PT, and the psychologist doesn't know that, and he's telling me I should go out and walk or whatever. So, I mean, I don't know. So that's a simple example, but maybe too simple, but it's an example. Now, I'm going to have to end with this, I think, this next. Here's what I've thought. It's not the case. If you take that simple system of my psychologist, my PT, and my internist, and they're all, making decisions, and I see them on occasion, and maybe the decisions, the practical effects of one of their decisions reinforces in some way positive effects of a decision made by one of the other two, or maybe it has some other effect, maybe a negative effect for that matter. Well, what I think is to really understand how this system works and how I can't reduce it to just talking about the decision making of the psychologist by him or herself, the PT by him or herself, and the internist by him or herself. Rather, I've got to look at them as in an overlapping system, in a system, but with respect to some modulus in. I'm going to call that the modulus of concern. That phrase has been used, it pops up elsewhere, and some, I guess, I've seen it in some engineering applications, maybe, but, it's just a chunk of time, the significant chunk of time that everything is being looked at, or a significant value that is being that is sort of a key point that's a number of things are depending on or referring to. And in this case, I think the modulus of concern is a chunk of time, what the slice of time is that we're looking at. So, and let me, if you'll bear with me, my psychologist is making decisions when he talks to me. Let's say I go to see him on a Saturday morning. Well, if I set the modulus of concern, or modulus of care, maybe that's a better phrase, to be Saturday from 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon, it's probably the case that the the psychologist's decisions, and I'm just focused on that chunk of time, if that they probably could be looked at independently. But if I'm looking at a modulus of concern or modulus of care that is a month in length, then it's very unlikely that the effects of one of those three decision makers will not have some impact on the outcomes of the decisions made by one of the other decision makers. If I make the modulus of concern wider or larger, then we'll see more systems interaction, systems effect. So that's what I'm trying to work out in my head now. The last thing I mentioned on Sunday when I first said I was going to do this, I said I was thinking that I wanted to address something which I think is out there, and here I'm probably on the ragged edge of just like lunacy, but I think there's probably a dogma that we take a lot, carry in our heads a lot, of sort of, even when we think about systems and actors in systems, we look at one actor, one system. So I called it the one actor, one system dogma. And the thing is, if I look at let's take one of these decision makers, my internist. He's making decisions about me, this patient. And there's a system in which he's doing that. It's a clinical, care system. And let's say we set the modulus of concern for 5 years. That's how long I've been seeing this person, or 10 years, I guess, probably more like it. And so, in all that time, he's operating in this system of him that consists of him, me, and his nurse, and I don't know, some other stray characters that come in and out of the picture. And so there's a real clinical care system that's operating there. But it's also the case that, in this case, the actor is the intern, that he, internal medicine guy is what I should be saying, that he is also functioning in multiple other systems that are related to what he's doing, that are sort of, that maybe even extensionally equivalent to what he's doing in my case, but intentionally, both with a T and an S, are in different systems. So, for one, is that healthcare organization's business system. What he's doing when he cares for me is he is always also operating as a key actor in the business of that healthcare organization, of the management of that organization. And I think, so to really understand what he's doing, you can't just isolate him to one system. He's operating in multiple systems. And then, of course, the question is, do we have some kind of cross effects with regard to are those systems characterized by different sets of values? For example, obviously the care system could be characterized by, well, we have to get the patient well. The business system might be characterized by, we have to make a profit, and we have to reduce costs. So do the different systems, are they characterized by different sets of values, and do they in any way impinge on each other? But as I said, I'm probably on the ragged edge of lunacy here, but it seems to me you can't just talk about, even if you're focused on, as in this case on the screen here, we got one actor and we've got that one set of documents, and the guy's making a decision about what vocabulary to use. It looks like a single system where we've abstracted from all the other stuff going on. But, you know, can you really, even in that case, if you simplify things that way, can you really just focus on that individual to understand what's going on here in this system? Can you just focus on that system, or if this person is coexisting in multiple systems, if you like, the business system and the clinical care system, do you have to consider those at the same time to understand, or this actor's role in all those systems to understand its role in this particular system? So anyway, that I know that's sort of kind of fuzzy towards the end, but I did spend well, never mind. Anyway, thanks for attending, those of you who attended, and I will have a recording of this available, and hopefully I'll be able to clean this up and talk with some of you some more to sharpen some of this analyses. This is quite preliminary work here, except for the earlier stuff where I mentioned the Nash equilibriums. That I have some examples there that are worked out quite carefully, and so I'm particularly interested in this concept of the modulus of concern, or the modulus of care, for understanding when we can look at take a more focused view of a decision maker in isolation versus considering a larger system of decision makers, all of which, remember, may be non-cooperating. Not that they're at war with each other, but non-cooperative in the sense that they're not passing messages back and forth saying, here's what I did and here's what I think you ought to do, and so on. Okay, so yeah, they're operating independently, but they do the effects they do have effects on the outcomes of the other decision makers. Anyway, thank you so much, and I'm going to say goodbye now and talk to all of you later.